You're watching Beyond Markets, where we bring you up to speed on development outcomes in Africa. I'm Kenneth Igbomor, and thank you so much for joining me on the show. Climate change is today's focus, and we'll find out how Africa can build resilience to climate shocks. Join the conversation. Let us know what you think. The hashtag to use is Beyond Markets. You can also hit me up on Twitter on my handle. That's at Kenneth Igbomor. Now, the Global Center on Adaptation is extending its footprint into Africa, and the city of Abidjan will join Beijing and Dhaka as locations for regional offices of the center. The chairman of the board of the Global Center on Adaptation and the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, join me as we explore how the GCA plans to operate in Africa. Thank you so much for your time and joining me on this interview, sir. And it's important to talk about the launch of the Global Center on Adaptation's regional office in Africa, and also the launch of your work program. But I'd like you to speak to the importance of the Africa Regional Office and how this could help to move that needle for Africa's climate change targets.
Well, I'm very pleased to be able to officially launch Global Center on Adaptation Regional Office in Africa to be housed within the African Development Bank. It is a third of such an initiative to establish, first one in Beijing and second one in Dhaka, Bangladesh, covering Southeast Asia. Now, Africa, as everybody knows, is the place hardest hit. While the African nations have contributed the least to the current climate phenomena, but they are experiencing the brunt of climate crisis. Therefore, we really want to help them design integrated regional programs for Africa to help African countries build capacity to address the climate phenomena, of course, with the help of countries, then address climate change and other health-related issues, and strengthen adaptive capacity to build back better from all this current crisis. Now, African countries with growing urban populations and a lot of international, intergovernmental activities, I think they are now being a part of or actively joining the international community in working together to address global challenges. I'm sure that the African Development Bank will play a very important role, closely working together with their counterpart like IMF and World Bank, European Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and Asian Development Bank, and also Chinese African Infrastructure, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, etc. So this is quite the important initiative which GCA is now doing. Then all the experiences and records and data will be shared and with the world leaders in January next year, when GCA is going to host an international summit meeting on adaptation to be chaired by Prime Minister Mark Rutte and also co-chaired by myself. And I really count on African leaders to really actively participate and show their global leadership.
All right, but looking at adaptation solutions and how you're looking to build more climate resilient cities in Africa, I'd like to know how the GCA is looking to work with the public and private sector in Africa.
Now, this adaptation is a very important part of policy responses when it comes to climate change, together with mitigation and adaptation. Much has been done on mitigation, but not much on adaptation. Now, through mitigation and adaptation, we can still deal with this climate change. Adaptation means to lower the risks posed by consequences of climate change. It also means that large-scale interventions and climate resilient infrastructure building And again, the changing our behaviors and wisdom, for example, drought-resistant crops will be much resilient against the changing climate change. And then we have to also work to mobilize necessary funding. Africans are still, most of them are belonging to least developed countries. Therefore, we have to mobilize all the necessary fundings. At least $7 to $15 billion as of now is necessary, with annually 7% increase in their investment. By 2050, they may need at least $35 billion, or at least even $100 billion by 2070. But these are all calculations, but it may change. African Development Bank has doubled its total share of climate finance in the past 5 years, poised to double the current amount to 25 billion between 2020 to 2025. Now, we need climate resilient infrastructures, and we need good early warning systems like cyclone like Ida and all this recent serious climate event has made very serious difficulties for African countries. And we also need to have good data to work with other countries. There is no comprehensive database reporting flows from donor to agencies, and therefore it is a prerequisite to know with a certainty whether fundings and our expertise are adequate to bridge adaptation gap between and among the countries in the region. This is some areas which we are going to focus.
Funding is very critical in driving all of these initiatives, but I'd like to know what the working plan is, and if you have priority areas that you are looking to focus in to get those first low-hanging fruits.
There is no plan B, in fact. I've been repeatedly saying that we only have to have a plan A because we don't have a planet B. This is a rhetoric, but I think this is a reality. More critical and wise investment should be made. Now, in relation to COVID-19, which is now hitting the world, and particularly on Africans, it will be very important. We will have to play a very important role, link between climate change and COVID-19. This is a different kind of interaction between human and animals. And this has been caused by human beings, in fact, by degrading our ecosystem. And therefore, there is a clear urgency to tackle this climate change issues. I think our first emphasis should to deal with currently rapidly changing climate phenomena, and while addressing COVID-19. At this time, while we see relatively low confirmed cases in Africa, but as testing continues, I'm afraid that there will be more and more cases will happen. African economies have been hit hardest hit. Africans face worst effect of climate change, while least contributing to this phenomenon is an issue of justice, issue of fairness, and even morality when poor developing African countries now having been suffering from this. Therefore, we have to really mobilize all the resources possible. I'm sure that African Development Bank will play a very important role working together with the whole multinational development bank, GCA, and among African political and business leaders.
It's a decade to the SDG targets being met, and when you look at how things have played out with COVID-19 coming into the scene, and when you look at the progress the continent has made over the years on climate change, I'd like you to speak to why it's important not to lose this progress that has been made over the years.
Now, we have to think bigger as in a comprehensive manner. The United Nations, while I was working as a Secretary General, has presented two most important visions and programs. One is Sustainable Development Goals with 17 goals and the Paris Climate Change Agreement. These are all interconnected, interrelated. There is no priority over one another. Starting from poverty eradication, health issues, and education, then most importantly, climate change. Now, forging a global partnership will be very important. Without working together, without joining our hands together, then nothing can be done. However resourceful, however powerful one country, one individual may be, there is nothing in this world to handle all this climate change, COVID-19, and global diseases. That is the main purpose of this. We have established GCA. GCA may be a small international organization, but it's growing now with the full support of many European countries' support, and joined by many countries like China and many East Asian and the Pacific countries, European Union. And therefore, my urging is that we have to mobilize all possible resources by strengthening the global partnership. That's the main purpose. We are now working together with the African leaders and African Development Bank.
And I'd like to know how you plan to align your objectives with this premier institution in Africa.
Now, in Africa, I think you have very good African Union leadership, African Union and Commission leadership, and leaders are now much more united than before, even though there are some conflict issues, unfortunately, going on. But largely speaking, while serving as a Secretary General, my work with the African Union leaders, African leaders, has always been most rewarding and encouraging because each and every national leaders that they are working in close cooperation within the African Union. That is why I hope that this office, regional office, to be located in African Development Bank with the support of many African national leaders will really help African people to address climate as well as global pandemic, to build back better from all this current crisis. And you have our full support.
It's important that we also build capacity on the ground, and I'd like to know how the GCA is planning to leverage on expertise, on African expertise to drive its work.
Wise investment on adaptation will be the answer on this matter. I have been traveling many places, and I'd like to give you one example which really we can see as a good example, which happened in Bangladesh in Asia. In 1970, one cyclone Bola killed 500,000 people with billions of dollars property damages. With continuous investment, even little investment, after 50 years, this year, when Cyclone Amphan, with the same severity and power, has just killed 118 people, just 118 people. Of course, one or two even losses of life will be very much regrettable and sad. But compared with 500,000 people dead, and now a little over 100 people dead after 50 years. Now we have a longer term vision, but while we address a short-term vision, a short-term address, and then we have to work in a longer-term vision. That is the main reason why we established this regional office in Africa. And I'm sure that Africa will really be able to address climate and global disease and poverty issues with working together.
Looking at how you plan to engage in Africa, I'd like to understand the model generally. Is it going to, you said earlier you talked about mobilizing investment, but are we going to see more climate-related type of investment coming in?
We'll have to work very closely with the World Bank and the IMF, most importantly, and European Union is always ready to provide such support. I had been working very closely with leaders of Sweden, Netherlands, Norway, and Germany, and Great Britain. These are the countries who are really generously supporting GCA as well as African development programs. Therefore, it's very important that we try to mobilize, first of all financing issues. As I said earlier, at least this year we need $7 to $15 billion, but it will increase. It will have to increase as the year goes by. The G7 leaders, as a G20 leaders, have pledged at least $5 trillion recently in their meeting. Of course, it was associated with the COVID-19 economic recovery. At the same time, this money will have to be used wisely, both in addressing climate change phenomena, as well as global health pandemic issues like COVID-19. Therefore, I have a brighter hope that we will be able to forge a stronger, a wider network of partnership among the governments and business communities and the civil society. In fact, without the global partnership, it will be very difficult to realize our dreams and ideals.
And I'd like to know how you plan to adapt your solutions to the diversity of the continent. You know, is it a one-size-fits-all approach you're going to use, or is it going to be more targeted to specific countries?
Through mitigation and adaptation, I think we can deal with the global challenges. Adaptation means to lower, first of all, lower the risks posed by consequences of climate change. And adaptation also means in large scale infrastructure investment, climate resilient. And we have to also have climate resilient farming. And we have to also improve water supply systems. And also we can educate the people to change their behaviors in maintaining climate resilient lifestyle. So many people, human beings, always have some ability to adapt to changes by developing their practices, cultures, and livelihood suited to local conditions. This is what we can learn, the long tradition and long-held wisdom and their lifestyle from Africa. Like planting, growing drought-resistant crops. And that will be one of the ways. And how to develop some technology capacity to conserve runoff water. You may have a good example in China when they have developing sort of sponge city. They try, whenever it rains, they try to collect this water through establishing some so-called sponge cities. This is one good example. So since GCA has all the offices and the connections with local governments and national government, we can help exchange expertise and their own locally suited experiences. Then this will be the major points of what GCA will work with the African Development Bank and African leaders to meet the climate crisis, to meet the pandemic crisis, so that in the end we can build back better for their future.
Earlier you're talking about the importance of getting all hands on deck to drive this initiative. And I would like you to speak to the importance of that once more, you know, getting that global effort going.
Our top priority should be tackle this, at this time, public health emergency, COVID pandemic, and to protect the vulnerable people, to support this all financial support. These are something which we have to do at this time urgently. Recovery from COVID-19 should mark the beginning of a global transformation to strong, sustainable, inclusive, and resilient economic development and growth. This can be done by investing wisely, not only the financial resources, but we have to use all local wisdom and wisdom from other regions and experiences. This is what I can emphasize at this time. And that's the main reason why I'm now reaching out to African leaders by establishing this regional office, African GCA office.
It's important to get that global partnership going, even with the local knowledge. I'd like to know how you also plan to synergize this.
Well, that's what I used to do while working at the United Nations, and I have made a lot of networks, personal and official networks with global leaders, even though I'm out of my office official capacity, but I'm having several different capacities, titles. First, the chairman as chairman of Global Center on Adaptation, and I'm also chairman of a BOAO Forum. This is a sort of Asian version of Davos Forum, where thousands of people gather together to exchange experiences, etc. And there are many areas where I can render my own know-how as well as a network, working together with African leaders. As I said, no country can do this alone. We really need to have a stronger global partnership, putting all our hands on the deck. That's why we are meeting together with the African leaders.
There's a saying in Africa that if a big tree falls in the middle of the forest and no one hears it fall, we begin to question whether it really fell. It brings me to one important part of the work you're trying to do, which is how you plan to raise awareness on this initiative across the continent.
We are very much keen to address African challenges. I've been repeatedly saying that without addressing African challenges, we will never be able to declare that we are living in a sustainable world. And that's why United Nations and all important regional political organizations like European Union and also OECD and G20 or G7, they are focusing much more on African development. That we have to go together. While there may be some differences in the their footsteps, but when we clearly march together in the same direction based on sustainable development goals, now soon Africa will be the continent where almost 1 billion people, citizens, will live together, then at the same time they have to be able to enjoy the basic requirement for their lives, for their education, for their health, and their participation in political and economic and social areas. That is what I think I'm urging national and global leaders should work together. That is the main purpose of Global Center on Adaptation is now intending to work together with African leaders.
All right, finally, sir, I just want to get your comment on how you plan to make this approach sustainable.
We have to make everything sustainable. There must be some political will, so no problem that we have a political will. We'll have to push it with a persistency and close contact with African leaders. But we have to work with the European Union and Asian leaders. While most of the Asian countries are on the developing status, but they are also working very hard to develop their own economy, to adapt to changing situation. So there is enough sufficient way of pulling wisdom and experience together. And you know that China has a GCA like CAF, China African Forum. And Japan has a TICAD, a Tokyo International Conference for African Development. Even Korea has also African Forum to work with African leaders, African development. And there are many multinational development banks whose priority would be focusing on sustainable development. UN has already put forward this most ambitious and most far-reaching visions to meet the aspiration of global people. That's the main and basic direction the United Nations is going to lead. While we are working together with all national and global leaders, I'm sure that the United Nations Secretary General and other UNDP, UNICEF, and WHO, all specialized agencies will be together with us. And we will try to mobilize their participation and their support. That is to make sure that our work is going to be sustainable to achieve the aspiration of sustainable development goals.
Thank you so much for your time on this show. Definitely quite a lot of interesting insights you have put forward today, and definitely I wish you all the best as you sojourn into Africa to try to move that needle for climate change. I've been speaking to the chairman of the board of the Global Center on Adaptation, the 8th Secretary General of the United States, Ban Ki-moon. Thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure.